What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo. So today I'm bringing to you my top 5 meta decks for the October 2019 format. Now we don't have too long before we're supposed to get a brand new ban list, but we still have plenty of big tournaments coming before that time comes. We have YCS Fort Worth this upcoming weekend, which I will be attending, so if you guys are there, I really hope to see you there. But we also have Pro Play Tour Columbus the weekend after, which is really neat because this is a $2,000 prize pool event. If you get your invite, you're invited to the $10,000 prize pool invitational in January, and I'll be there doing live stream commentary coverage for the event, be there to sign your guys' cards, take pictures, and different things like that. So it should be a good time. With all these tournaments coming up, I want to make sure you guys are the most prepared as possible because there are a lot of changes taking place, and we want to make sure that you guys can have all the information available so that you can be prepared for going into any of these events. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Kicking things off with number 5, there's actually not exactly one deck I have in this particular slot because the other slots are a bit solidified at this point, but there's been so many different decks and so much diversity in the format, I can't exactly put my finger on a deck that can really take the 5th slot. I mean, there's decks like Guru Control, which is management doing well. It's gotten like top 16, top 8 at multiple tournaments at both like the YCS and regional level. It's actually won some regionals as well, and it just has so many good strengths for it, just being a control deck and doing what it does best. You have decks like Altergeist, which have also been doing well at both the regional and YCS level, being able to actually win some of these events and garner top cut slots, being another very solid control deck in its own right. You've even got stuff like Gren Maju, which, I mean, I don't exactly know if I could put that in the number 5 category, but this is a really solid deck that people have actually been coming out of the woodwork and being able to make work. It actually won YCS Niagara, and at first we thought that this was a complete joke, but there actually is some validity to it, and this is a deck you need to look out for if you plan on going to any of these major events. I think if I had to put my finger on a single deck for that number 5 slot, I think I would actually go with Pendulum, just simply because of the fact that Pendulum has probably had the most consistent performance out of all the decks that we've seen up until this point. I'm more so talking about the Endymion version just because you can take advantage of cards like Endymion, Mighty Master of Magic. Serving of Endymion is insane. You've got access to cards like Mystical Beast Jackal King to play around cards like Nibiru. It's a very strong combo deck, being able to amass crazy turn 1 boards. Can play fairly well going second. Yeah, it is a bit vulnerable to some forms of disruption, but ultimately it's still a very solid deck. It's a very cheap deck that you can pick up as well. I've done an entire series of videos about the deck if you guys want to check those out, just so you guys know the ins and outs of the deck and how it works. But I think, like I said, if I had to give it to anything, I'd have to give Endymion my number 5 slot. But coming in at number 4, we have a deck that has been rolling its way through the top tables, and even though its prior form is not really as popular as it used to be, it's still a very strong deck in its own right, and that is Thunder Dragon. Now, Thunder Dragon has definitely pivoted from the past, being able to go more in a pure direction rather than incorporating cards like the Dangers, going the Danger Thunder route, just simply because the Danger Thunder route was actually very vulnerable to cards like Nibiru and Dark Ruler No More once the Megatins were released. But pure Thunder Dragon is still a pretty solid deck. Remember, Thunder Dragon Colossus is still a very terrifying card, not to mention Thunder Dragon Titan also makes for a very solid boss monster. You've got the inclusion of new cards like Dimension Shifter, which is pretty much 50-50 whether or not people are choosing to incorporate it, but just pretty much throwing down all these gigantic monsters for your opponent to deal with while also denying them the ability to search or just pop their cards during their turn is actually pretty good, and you just have so many different directions you could take with this pure build as well. Some people are even experimenting putting like the Orcust engine in Thunder, which is pretty crazy, but for the most part, pure has been the way to go. It's got a lot of pretty decent matchups, and while it does suffer from some consistency issues, I think that's why I feel pretty safe putting it at my number 4 slot. Now, coming in at number 3, we have probably one of the most consistent and well-rounded decks of the format, and that's Salamangreat. Now, Salamangreat has a lot of really good things going for it, even though there's only one copy of Gazelle and one copy of Circle at the deck's disposal, but you don't really need Gazelle in some instances. That's why I see some people play Pot of Desires, and you banish it away, but you know, they sometimes still win because Salamangreat is still that powerful of a deck. When you have access to cards like Flame Buffalo to allow you to just pretty much Pot of Greed every single turn you normal summon it, that seems pretty good with the inclusion of new cards like Sea Archiver that essentially act like a Salamangreat Spinny, except it's not a Salamangreat card, but you can essentially make Mirage Stalio every single turn because of the recursion. That's really powerful. One of the best aspects of Salamangreat is the fact that while its turn 1 boards may not be that menacing, especially when you look at it in comparison to some of the other bigger combo decks, when you get past that first and maybe second turn, the amount of recursion and the amount of value that a deck like Salamangreat can generate can be easily enough to outvalue your opponent. We've even seen players starting to play multiple copies of Will of the Salamangreat just so they can play around cards like Nibiru, since Nibiru is a very popular card for combo decks and is one of the Achilles heels of Salamangreat. But even if you get hit by a Nibiru, Will can just be a nice extender to get you back into the game and pretty much just get you right where you left off and help you push forward through your opponent's disruption. Salamangreat's recursion is its strength, and there's so much power behind it. You can easily outgrind your opponent in most situations if you can get into that game. It's kind of just getting past that first or second turn that's a little bit difficult just depending on the matchup. But ultimately, Salamangreat, you know, it doesn't necessarily excel in any particular area, but it doesn't really lose to anything either. You know, when you play a deck like Salamangreat, you're going to feel like you can play every single game of a tournament because in most instances, you're going to have the resources to be able to actually play every game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And I personally like a deck like that, so maybe I value it a little bit highly, but I'm going to put Salamangreat for my number 3 slot. But coming in at number 2, we have a deck that a lot of you guys might have expected to be in the number 1 slot, and that's Sky Striker. Yeah, Sky Striker has definitely fallen from its number 1 slot, but why is that? Well, there's a few reasons. First off, Sky Striker is still an incredibly strong deck, even with the hits that it suffered throughout multiple ban lists and throughout all the meta shifts and everything that it's had to go through. It's still one of the strongest decks of the format, and you can see it still had plenty of representation. It's still winning major tournaments or getting into the top cuts or the finals of multiple tournaments as well. It's still an incredibly strong deck for all the reasons that we've discussed in the past. I don't think I really need to reiterate any of those. But why is Sky Striker still at number 2? Well, the reason for that is because Sky Striker, you know, when you compare it to the number 1 deck, it kind of comes down to representation. While Sky Striker is a very good deck, it just comes down purely to the numbers of how many people are going to be playing it. And the thing is, while you do still need to look out for Sky Striker, especially at the top tables of competitive play, you have to keep in mind that you're not going to see Sky Striker nearly as much as you're going to see our number 1 pick. So arguably, you know, Sky Striker might be able to nudge up into the number 1 slot depending on your perspective, but I think a lot of people are still preparing for it, and it's one of those decks that, you know, it's kind of solved at this point. People kind of understand the ins and outs of it. Doesn't mean you have to not prepare for it in your main or side deck, but it's one of those decks that from a representation standpoint, you're not going to see it nearly as much as our number 1 pick. So that's why I went ahead and gave Sky Striker my number 2 slot. But that's going to bring us to my number 1 meta deck of the October 2019 format, and if you haven't already figured it out, it's actually going to be Orcust. Now, this is a very big number 1 pick for multiple reasons. First off, when I say Orcust, there isn't exactly one specific Orcust deck I'm talking about because there's so many different variants of Orcust running around right now. It's crazy. I mean, there's just like the pure Orcust deck that kind of just runs really good value generating cards like the Sky Striker engine, which is kind of ironic. You've got stuff like, you know, the Cyber Dragon Orcust deck, which takes advantage of Cyber Dragon Infinity. You take advantage of the fact that Cyber Dragon is actually good against both Sky Striker and Orcust mirror matches because you can just go ahead and contact fuse away that Cyber Dragon for stuff like Mega Fleet or even Fortress Dragon, since the other archetypes comprise of machines as well, which makes mirror matches a ton of fun. But then you have what I think might be the strongest version so far, and one of the strongest versions that we might see hit on the upcoming ban list, and that's going to be Luna Light Orcust. Now, I just did an entire series of videos about Luna Light Orcust on my channel, so I highly recommend checking those out if you haven't already, because this deck is terrifying. Being able to go into cards like Outer Entity Azathoth before even proceeding to go into its full Orcust combo, in addition to doing a myriad of other different things, this deck can do stuff like summon Curious and then dump any Floodgate from your deck and then go into Griffin and set it to your field. We've seen degenerate decks of the past do this, and Luna Light Orcust is no exception. Being able to abuse cards like Luna Light Tiger and just generate so many resources, get free rank 4s onto the board is absolutely crazy. You've got stuff like Abyss Dweller for the mirror match with other Orcust decks, or even decks like Salamangreat or any other graveyard-centric decks. You can pretty much play any toolbox of rank 4s that you want that might be good for any particular matchup, and that really suits the deck well. Now, the deck obviously isn't perfect. It does have its weaknesses, and it has those choke points that can actually make the difference between a win or a loss, but there's so much power behind the deck, and it's something you definitely have to look out for. But beyond that, there's even like going second Orcust lists that just try to maximize on every single good going second card in the game, and I think it's just so cool that there's so many different variants of this deck that I have to put it in the number 1 category sheerly because of the representation. There are so many people playing Orcust lists, and the thing is, when you look just going based off of all the past top 32 breakdowns of the major events, Orcust has been like the #1 deck in the top breakdown of all of these tournaments. So you can bet that if you're going to, YCS Dallas or Pro Play Tour Columbus or any other regional or local, maybe not local, but any other big competitive tournament in your area, expect to see a lot of different Orcust variants, and that's what you need to be prepared for the most. Now, the thing I will say is that with the ban list coming up, Orcust is probably going to get the axe in some respect. I think Nightmare Mermaid might be on the chopping block, but maybe even Sky Striker might be on the chopping block too, since it's been around for so long. But I'm really curious to see how the new format shapes up, and that's why I wanted to make this video now, so that once we do get the ban list, we can go ahead and reevaluate, especially with some other tournaments taking place a little bit later on in the month, and we can kind of see how the meta has shifted as we move on towards the later parts of the month. But guys, that's gonna do it for the video. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.